Hello, everyone. My name is John Wilson. I am Tribune of the Stakeholders for Seattle City Lights Lighting Design Lab. I'm going to set the table very quickly and make up some time by talking about, why do utilities care about this conversation? Why are they actually in it beyond the sort of platitudes that we often hear, like I'm just trying to get some energy efficiency and hit these targets, right? There's really three reasons that utilities are making this investment, and their business models are evolving, and I'm just going to touch on that quickly, and the rest of my colleagues are really going to take it home. The three topics really are, yes, there's reliable energy savings. That's kind of like the first generation. Like we all understand utilities want to get cost-effective savings, especially where there's targets or regulations in place, requiring them to do so. The next really big topic is what a lot of utilities are describing generically as like customer service plus. Utilities are rapidly waking up to the fact that they need to be part of the solution for technology transfer and not a hindrance or somebody who is slowing that process down. And to deliver, to technical professional services to utilities is something that's going to reinforce the utility business model and allow them to sustain what they're doing. And then the last one is just kind of funny because it's back in vogue since the 1940s, but it's next generation electrification. And this really has to do with our current climate around carbon reduction and the fact that electrification now leads to hopefully a reduction in harmful greenhouse gases and all that. So if you are a utility, it's not any one of these things, it's all three of these things. And for the utility community members in the room, I encourage you to think about putting your business plan together and addressing all three of these things to make a comprehensive plan for why your utility should make a sustained investment in the CEA market. What is different now than the last 5 or 10 years? Why are we at, what many people are kind of describing as an inflection point or a real growth opportunity? Well, I just described for you what has changed on the utility landscape. It's no longer just about energy savings. It's about load growth. It's about delivering a level of customer service that makes, that gives the utility a chance to have a positive interaction with customers beyond just billing you once a month, right? But what is happening is it's really how those things are starting to align with the horticultural lighting market and where things, where the alignment is starting to come together. So 5-10 years ago, we didn't have great, reliable product that was trusted by consumers. The time wasn't right for utilities to push that as a kWh saving mechanism. Similarly, utilities were less interested in load growth and electrification 10 years ago than they are now, and that's reflected in any utility conference that you go to. That's the big buzzword. And then last but not least, cultivators are hungry for information, and although utilities might be strange bedfellows as far as a resource where you would go to get that, people are hungry for information, and utilities in just about every other C&I market and with residential consumers have played a helpful role in the past delivering that service and good information. And so you can see these things are aligning in such a way that give me a lot of optimism that we're going to be able to team up and really make a positive impact. Everybody is familiar with this basic technology diffusion curve: invest on the left, cash out on the right. When Matt was talking about making LED lights in his basement, that's so far off the left that it's not even on this chart, but it takes people like that to get this whole thing going, right? So we're familiar with this. What is so cool, again, just reinforcing, because I'm a visual learner, we now have organizations like the DLC, Leora is going to be up here taking this, that are help propping this up. We have RII, what a phenomenal resource. And then it's really, in my mind, those two organizations are two of the most critical pillars that needed to be in place in order for utilities to come behind and do the stuff that is our bread and butter work in the traditional C&I markets. Before we could be effective in this market, we needed to, we needed the resources and the tools that are brought by those other DLC and RII. So it's just terrific that these are in place because it gives us something as a utility personnel to work from. Information abounds. People are so hungry for information out there. And where do you go when you're hungry for information? You go to the YouTube, right? And a quick search about grow lights or growing cannabis, you could spend all day looking at the science stuff. you can spend all day looking at this stuff online, and while you might get some good nuggets of information, nothing is as good as coming here to this conference and the information that you're getting, listening to these bona fide speakers get up and really open up and share, and the cross-pollination we're getting with utilities and the cultivation community coming together. Outside this cultivation space, we have a really positive track record working with industry. And my favorite thing, the first Efficient Yields workshop I went to, I did not know it was a utility function until somebody pointed that out to me. They did, the utility, Energy Trust, I got to give them props. They did so good getting out of the way and letting there be a really healthy peer-to-peer information exchange that it was unlike any other utility experience I'd ever gone to. And I really believe as we think about utilities, how can we work better with the cultivation community? That's going to be a big key. Support good information. If you're a utility, continue to support the good information that is out there. Consider becoming a member of organizations like RII. Support or at least engage with the work DLC is doing in this horticultural space. Because it's going to be a way to right-size your utility investment so you can be effective and participate in this market even if you don't have a huge customer base underneath you that allows you to have a dedicated person. Amplify trusted information, and my last one to sign out on, my little daughter. Think about the children, watering the crops, the next generation coming up. So that's it for me. Thanks, y'all, and my next speaker.
What I'm going to be talking about is some industry trends that we've seen as far as what's going on in the global market for horticulture lighting, but then also some terminology and baselines. So first again, I'm Corinne Wilder with Fluence Bioengineering. We were a startup back in 2015, and now we're owned by OSRAM, which is a $4.5 billion lighting company globally. So we've got over 350 commercial cannabis installations and over 80 commercial ag installations right now, and we've learned a ton over that whole time period. So it's one of those things that as we get into looking at what is going on globally, we really have to pay attention to what's coming the next 7, 10, 15 years and beyond. So when we really look at, we were kind of in, as far as the whole global lighting market, is the greenhouse era and then going into vertical and city farming era. So that's more indoor cultivation. That's more looking at R&D, vertical farming and such. And the industry is just going to continue to grow as we find more and more pressures environmentally and population-wise. So hopefully everyone in this room has read the 2018 Cannabis Energy Report that RII and New Frontier Data published 2 years ago, which really took a very, very hard look. I think it was 25 plus pages of information about just the cannabis energy sector. Really the key highlight there is it's 70 times more energy intensive than other commercial lighting applications right now because of the amount of light that's required. I'm going to step into that a little bit more, but also looking at the US cannabis market trajectory. Here we've got medical and adult use that's projected here through the year 2025, but also you can see the huge amount of the illicit market, which is predominantly using HPS technology right now. The impacts on the energy sector because of that are just going to continue to scale up as we go. So I wanted to touch quickly about segments because there's a lot of people in this room that absolutely know this information, hands down, back and forward, but there's some people in this room, we've got a very diverse crowd that is just brand new to the industry. So we really want to look at what does greenhouse mean? Sometimes these are multi-acre, multi-hectare sites that require energy use through lighting and HVAC and reheat, et cetera, to make sure that their crop production is going to continue. There's also indoor cultivation. It can be very small, multi-level, 2-tier sliding racks, whatever, but it's also a very energy-intensive environment. When you look at it and our current legacy install base as far as indoor versus greenhouse, a very important factor that you have to understand when you're looking at energy modeling or producing rebates for these potentially is that when you're talking indoor cultivation, you're talking sole source lighting. So unless you're using something like Solitube, the only lighting that you're going to get is from the fixtures that you're using in your environment. However, when you go to greenhouse and you're looking at the supplemental lighting, that's what you have to look at. This is where you're using the existing DLI from the sun plus whatever supplemental lighting you're using. So for a cannabis operation, if you're installing 900 ppfd in this indoor environment here, on the, what is that, right? On the left, you may only be installing somewhere between 3, 4, 500 ppfd, depending on where you are, if your DLI is low or high. There's vertical farming as well that we have to pay attention to. Sam was talking about his farm earlier, and then there's also research environment, which are usually very tightly honed environments and require a lot of controls. So terms and baselines and ecosystem, let's talk a bit about this. So Nadia was talking about yesterday how we haven't really touched on DLI, we haven't really touched on some of these terms. Let's just go through some of them really quickly. There's PAR, which is photosynthetic active radiation. This is really just the light, the visible wavelength between 400 and 700 nanometers. That is PAR, that is the light. Photosynthetic photon flux, PPF, is the amount of light that's coming out of the fixture. So amount of photons, actually, that are coming out of the fixture. So this is kind of like the total number of lumens that are coming out of the fixtures for the commercial lighting people. PPFD, photosynthetic photon flux density, that is how many photons are actually hitting that plant canopy or whatever canopy you're measuring. So that's what we call PPFD. It's kind of like foot candles. Think about that. And then there's DLI, which is daily light integral. Again, this is the amount of light that is hitting over a course of time. So it's a measurement of how much you're going to get over 6 hours, 8 hours, 10, 12, 18, whatever the time period is that you need to measure. So a quick little segue for lighting to commercial or commercial lighting to horticulture. If you've got an office space, I want to really look at the first category, which is PPFD on this chart. In a typical office space, you'll have about 37 to 65 foot candles, which is equivalent to 6 to 10 ppfd that you will see in an office space. If anybody's got a Apogee or a Lycor light meter, take it into your office and you'll see 10 or 11 ppfd. For cannabis, I mean, you can go 7, 900, 1500, 2000. And you can see how much more energy intensive that is. I like to use the little analogy that you think about all of the lights that are used in the Yankee Stadium, and then you take those and you condense them into a large CVS, and that's about the equivalent to what a cannabis grow operation is. And we have to remember always that our true customer is actually the plant. So we go back to maybe 3rd, maybe 5th grade science class, and just remembering that chemical reaction behind photosynthesis and what that means. So our true customer is actually the plant, so we have to pay attention to the whole environment. It's not just lighting. And with that, there's different growth stages. So in each of these growth stages, you're going to require a different PPFD as well. So from germination propagation through veg and bulking, going into flowering and fruiting and finishing, you can have a range of anywhere from 6, 10, 50 ppfd up to 900 and beyond. Environmental conditions, these are really important to call out as well, because again, when you change one thing, you're going to influence another. And that's something about the ecosystem that we really always have to pay attention to. We actually did a study with SMUD a couple years ago where we looked at all of the different systems together, and a straight HPS to LED conversion for over to LED. The first round reduced 18% overall, and the second round they were able to capture 25% savings. So Casey actually touched on this in the lighting breakout section the other day, but it's always important to test, measure, verify, and repeat, and then continue to do this over and over again so you can make incremental improvements as you go. There's baseline fixture crosses, so this is very important again to the utilities in the room to understand when you're going from propagation to vegetative to flower, there are definitely certain technologies that are used a lot in these different areas. And so when you've got propagation, and this isn't like a complete full list, the Cannabis Energy Report has some, and then also the Best Practices Guide calls some of these out too. But you can have some fixture crosses that are quite reasonable now, going from T5HO all the way to 1,000 watt high pressure sodium. Some more trends are just really quickly. We've got more and more best practices guides and publications coming out every day. So whether this is something that's to do with getting grow rooms right, LED, HVAC, something about energy, it's really aggravating sometimes to hear that, oh, well, there's just not enough data out there. It's coming. There's definitely some data, and so just to say and turn a blind eye that we don't have the data, Colorado's got some really fantastic publications, and so does California. So I would say please go verify before there's the idea that there's not data out there. Again, program trends, we've got state level programs that we've talked about already. California has this awesome mixed tier lighting for greenhouses, which is 6 watts and below, or 6 to 25 watts, depending on what kind of tier you have for your greenhouse. And then as far as program levels, Efficiency Vermont, which is Lauren, is gonna have a nice rebate program. Hydro-Quebec also has a prescriptive rebate program right now. And Energy Trust of Oregon, Doug is in the room, they've rolled out a program through their retail locations as well. And then finally, what do customers want? I mean, really, we've seen a very, very dedicated trend between lighting sales and where rebates are. The better the rebates, the bigger the market conversion. I mean, it's been shown year after year after year, and it's absolutely true. The better incentives that we can get, the more market adoption we absolutely get for customers. And they really appreciate that. That is it for me. Oh.
Hi, everyone. I am from the DesignLights Consortium. And if you are a utility or have worked with commercial lighting, you're familiar with who we are. We are interested in market transformation, and we promote high-quality, energy-efficient lighting. And we work with utilities, manufacturers, energy efficiency programs in order to transform the market. Our guideposts are energy, quality, and controllability. And that's whether we're talking about horticulture lighting or network lighting controls, or our major QPL, our big list about solid-state lighting controls, which has 500,000 products. These are always our guideposts. We are a nonprofit organization. We're located in Boston, Massachusetts. We have about 20 full-time staff located across the United States. This is very slow. There we go. Our main mode of operation is that we create performance standards and standards for utilities in order to use for incentives. We work with federal, local, and state organizations in order to have test methods that can then inform qualified product lists that help utilities provide incentives. One of our big outcomes is our qualified products list. We have an emerging one for horticulture lighting I'm going to talk about today, but we also have many tools and fact sheets and information that we provide to utilities so that they understand what's happening in the market. And of course, our goal is to accelerate energy efficient adoption. And right now, that's mostly about LED because it is the most efficacious light source that we have. It's the one that promises the longest life and the largest maintenance savings. One of the things I want to tell you about is that we very much are part of a rulemaking type of process. We're not legislated or required to have rulemaking, but every single time that we have a draft of our technical specifications, we have a 4 to 6 week comment period. We encourage you to provide your comments to us in writing or by contacting us. And then we go through those comments. We work with our utility members to revise a specification, and then we put it out to a final draft. So please be involved in our rulemaking process. There will be a new draft for our horticultural lighting specification in April. So the DLC is a member organization. We're supported by 74 member utilities across the United States and Canada. This is a list of our utilities. There are many of them in the room, so thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Seattle City Light. Very appreciative. This is some new data I wanted to share with you. So one of the things that we hope to do with our horticultural lighting specification and our qualified products list is show the relationship between the spec and the list and incentives. So this is data from Bob Gunn from Synergy, and basically it shows that out of the 122 top utilities in the United States, including DLC members, that about 40% of them are either referencing the specification or are requiring the list. About another 50% don't use our list at all, but we are seeing that change quickly, and about 10% of them don't have horticultural lighting rebates at all. So this is something that we are keeping track of and are hoping to see change in the next year. So why are utilities concerned about rebates? Why are they concerned about controlling lighting? That's because when you look at the power demand, the electrical power demand that occurs in CEA, whether it's in greenhouses for flower or veg or cannabis or indoor facilities, lighting is the dominant use of electricity in these facilities. And if we can use more efficient lighting, more efficacious lighting, and still have the same light levels, the same DLI, then we can really reduce our power demand. So regulators, are, of course, are concerned. If you look at the DOE report from 2017, it predicts that horticultural lighting in CEA will grow by 15 to 25% year over year. And this is concerning to states that have requirements for energy efficiency or carbon mitigation, and so they want to keep track of what's going on. So we're seeing some variation in the rollout of regulations across the US. I know Kay Doyle spoke about this yesterday. So what we're seeing in the market is either lighting power density limits, so basically this sets the top light level for your light levels in your facility, or a minimum requirement for efficacy, so this is ppf per watt, right, light per watt. In Illinois, we see that Illinois allows you to use the DLC QPL, and you're automatically able to comply, or you can use an LPD requirement. Massachusetts is similar. They also have the ability for you to give them data about products that aren't on the DLC QPL, and they'll evaluate them for quality control. California, we had a wonderful code session yesterday, is going through its rulemaking for CEA. They're trending towards using efficacy instead of lighting power density. We're seeing it in building codes. City of Denver is an example that has a brand new building code that's going to go into effect in April 1st that basically says you have a PPE threshold or you can use the DLC QPL. That's different for lamps versus fixtures. And IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code, just passed through voting a new mandatory requirement for CEA that will have a minimum efficacy for these types of facilities, along with a coverage area for that cultivation space. So it's the Wild West, right? This is early days in CEA and horticultural lighting especially. We're trying to bring some trusted information to growers and utilities and code bodies and regulators with a QPL. So again, we go through a rulemaking type of process, public comment process, where we're asking for information from lots of stakeholders. But really, not only is the QPL about efficacy, but it's about high quality. And what we mean by high quality is a life in terms of par flux of 36,000 hours or longer, a life for drivers or fans of 50,000 hours or longer, and a 5-year warranty, and a horticultural safety certification. And if you don't have all of that stuff, you can't be on the QPL. So we work with DNR. Rose is one of the amazing reviewers for our applications that looks at the horticultural lighting products. We are very appreciative of them. So we work together to make sure that only high quality products are on the list. Again, there's a value proposition for the QPL for everyone. Whether you're a grower and you're looking for trusted third-party information, objective information, you can look at the QPL to sort by efficacy or power demand or light or flux. If you are a manufacturer, you can differentiate yourself from other manufacturers by having this trusted, verified data. There's bad actors in every organization, in every field, and we are seeing some of that in horticultural lighting, so it's really good that we're all sharing the same type of information. And of course, for code bodies and utilities, we're giving them trusted, verified information as well. The current specification that we've had since October is version 1.2. The minimum performance spec for DLC is efficacy, and in this case, our efficacy is 1.9 micromoles per joule. We have a 5% lower tolerance so that products can comply. But any product that's less than 1.9 micromoles per joule is not going to be on the QPL. Our standards, so when we have a technical requirement, we are using IES standards and ASABI standards, and we're to some extent limited by those standards. So for example, liquid-cooled fixtures, which we would like to see on the QPL, we don't have a standard from ASABI yet that tells us how to test and measure those fixtures so that we know how to look at that reporting. We're waiting for ASABI to complete that process so that we can have liquid-cooled fixtures on the QPL. You can see our technical requirements below. We have almost 70 products on the QPL, which is amazing considering that this has been live for less than a year. One of the market actors, as I mentioned before, is regulations from states. So we have a state compliance filter. If you click on the state compliance menu on the left side, you can actually filter the list by either the Illinois regulations or the Massachusetts regulations. So for example, this is a screenshot from last week. We had 68 products on Thursday. 52 of them would comply with the Massachusetts regulations, for example. So it's a very easy way to see what works. I want to share some information about the data with you. This is the most current data, again, 68 products as of last week. There is no relationship between efficacy and light output. So if you want high light output products that are, for example, equal to 1,000 watt HPS, you can find them on the QPL. Same or better efficacy. If you want low light output products that are very close to the crop that you would use, for example, in vertical farming, you can find those products with high efficacy as well. And we have easily can see one-for-one replacements in all the categories for fixtures that are currently available. Right now, our average efficacy is 38% higher than the most effective HPS double-ended product. So you're seeing a big jump in efficacy from commercial products that are available now. As I said before, the efficacy is higher than HPS. Again, it's 2.36 compared to 1.7, but it's only increasing slowly. So sometimes we hear claims about efficacy increasing rapidly. In terms of the products that we see on the QPL, we're not seeing big improvements yet. Perhaps we'll see them in a year. Right now, it's 24% higher than our threshold of 1.9. If you filter the QPL for these state regulations, for example, Massachusetts, you will find that that regulation PPE is 16% higher than our threshold, 16% higher than 1.9. But what happens is there are about a fourth of the products on our QPL that aren't compliant with those regulations. So you would essentially filter out the products, which means for those manufacturers, there's reason to improve what they're offering. One of the things that we used to see a lot is sort of this blurple. You guys heard of the term blurple or pinkish light that you would see in greenhouses? A lot of the early LEDs only had blue and red LEDs in them. We're seeing that change. We're seeing a lot of phosphor-converted white LEDs with red. So you can see among the mix, there's lots of green content that is available among the fixtures. About 30, on average, the fixtures that we see on the QPL have about a 35% green component and have about 3% far red component. So there's very few of those blurple fixtures on the QPL right now. There's no requirement that they have phosphor converted white or white light, but that's the way the market's trending, and we're seeing that in the products that are available. And that is me. It's my contact information. Thank you very much.
Awesome. So I'm Lauren. I'm an emerging technologies and services manager at Efficiency Vermont. So I test new emerging technologies and services, not just in the indoor ag space, but in a lot of different spaces. I pilot those technologies in Vermont with Vermont customers. And then if those pilots go well, then we implement those programs across the state at a much larger scale, and in some cases in other jurisdictions as well. So this is more or less my agenda. I'll go through why we're seeing current market increases in Vermont and future market increases expected. And then I'll talk a little bit about some programs we have. As my colleagues mentioned, indoor grows, greenhouses, and hemp are a really big reason for these increases, and we definitely see all of those applications in Vermont. So this is where normally I'm presenting to a group that's a little less interested in this area. And so this is where I say, let's get the elephant out of the room. Cannabis legalization is becoming really big. About a third of Americans are now living under fully recreationalized cannabis. And there's an urbanization movement happening as well. Typically, younger, more liberal folks are moving from the Northeast across the U.S. to get cheaper housing and better jobs. So we're seeing this phenomenon really move across the U.S. Into states like Illinois, as this mentions. Another big thing for Vermont was actually the Farm Bill in 2018 through the USDA. We saw a bunch of hemp come into the state since then, and actually Vermont's in a very unique scenario where this is not a ballot initiative, it's a legislature initiative. So the legislature has kicked around the idea of doing commercial legalization with dispensaries and commercial grows for about 5 years in a row, and they've never been able to pass it. They're actually debating it right now in the State House at this very moment. So it may pass this year, and so we'll see those commercial size grows come online. But it's been a really interesting market to study because with the absence of that large cannabis grow, we're still seeing a lot of CEA pop up in a lot of different areas. So it's been really interesting to watch this kind of fragmented market still move into the CEA space even without that main cash crop driver. So some folks got into this earlier, but basically I use this case study to describe to people that we really need to scale up our food production. Farmers need to harvest in the next 4 decades the same amount of food as the last 8,000 years. That means that we will be increasing our greenhouse size. Greenhouses are growing at about 20% year over year across the U.S. And at about 10% in lit area, and I would venture to guess that in Vermont it might even be faster than this. So this is Westland. There was another slide on it earlier, but this is just showing the scale at which we might need to ramp up in order to keep this food production going. So in Vermont, we also have a big farm-to-table movement. People love out-of-season produce and greens in the middle of the winter. So we're seeing a lot of folks use local greens. This is a case study from Peru, Vermont, in southern Vermont. This woman grows microgreens and ornamental flowers in her basement. We see a lot of these small, medium businesses popping up in addition to a lot of the large cannabis grows that you all have been talking about. So this woman sells her microgreens to a local restaurant. It's won a bunch of awards for using local sustainable produce, and that's very common in our state. So this is actually an upstate New York customer right over the border, but we also see a lot of dairy farmers moving to hemp. Historically, they've had really low margins or even negative margins in recent years, so moving to hemp is actually a really great option for them. Even if they don't make it, they might make more money than they did in dairy, which is a highly subsidized industry. Dairy farmers at the most maybe make 3% margin, so these margins on hemp are much, much better if they do it right. The other thing is they have a lot of land. We are a really scarcely populated state, so a lot of these farmers have hundreds of acres of land. They have growing experience. They have facilities that they haven't used for a while, like barns that they can dry the hemp in, so we see a lot of them transitioning. Also climate resilience, so this is the droughts in California, the fires in California, the deep freeze in Chicago. This is a picture of some new Americans going back to their plots after we had Hurricane Irene a couple years ago that flooded most of the state of Vermont. And I hear from these customers all the time, I can't predict the winters like I used to. I can't follow the almanac anymore. I get random frosts in the middle of May that I never had to worry about before. So they're actively looking into spending more energy in these greenhouses or usually greenhouses in order to maintain their crop. They can't afford to lose a crop in the middle of May due to a random frost. And they never really had that issue before. So we're hearing more about people trying to be resilient with their grows and really have backup systems so that they can keep growing regardless of what's happening outside. John touched on this a little bit as well, but in the utility space, we have been addicted to screw-based lighting for a long time. It's been an easy market. It has given us a lot of great savings per unit, large volumes at a residential and commercial scale. But now that that's over and baselines are creeping on that, we need to find a new area to get savings. And this indoor ag market is a really great one. We also see that we're serving a lot of markets that we normally wouldn't have touched. People like low-income customers and renters are some of the biggest home growers, and home grow is legal in Vermont. So we do see a lot of like small-scale residential stuff happening, and it's really nice to be able to get your foot in the door with a renter who can't really do anything other than screw-based lighting in their space. So it's nice to be able to connect with them and perhaps create more relationships for future state. As I mentioned, we have creeping baselines, so as codes get more and more efficient, we're required to meet those codes and give incentives on things above code. So this is getting harder and harder for us as well. And then this last one is really important, but utilities are moving from reducing energy to being really creative about when we use energy. So it's often about overall grid health now and carbon in comparison to reduction of overall use. So we're doing a lot of pilots around flexible load management, carbon impacts, things like natural refrigerants that have really intense carbon applications. And for our distribution utility partners, the people who supply the power, because we're responsible for saving the power as an efficiency utility, they really care about this. They want sustainable load growth, and they want people to be using energy during off-peak times because that's the cleanest form of energy. In the Northeast, we have a really, really clean grid, and it's getting cleaner. In Vermont, we actually buy a lot of power from Hydro-Quebec, so that is completely renewable. And then we see dirtier fuels come onto the market, and the distribution utilities are required to buy things like coal when there is a peak. So we're really trying to avoid those peaks and be creative with these customers to understand how we keep them off peak as they're growing with 1,000-watt lights every couple feet. So now I'll talk about some programs. This was the first residential indoor prescriptive program in the country. We developed it alongside Burlington Electric, and it's available for all Vermonters for residential grow operations. It can be any type of plant. This is what our website looks like. It's $100 off an LED grow light, and it needs to meet the DLC specifications. We were also finding that we were basically selling out of dehumidifiers in the state. So we're also really pushing the dehumidifier rebates on Energy Star dehumidifiers because we know that people are using those for grows. So this is what our rebate form looks like. We'll probably make it a lot more streamlined in the future, but we needed to start somewhere. So we offer $100. We get minimal information back from the customer. So things like what wattage were you replacing this with? How many grow cycles per year do you have? Do you have cooling in your grow space? Like, do you use a window air conditioner? And our savings are related to those things. We're getting this information so that we can hone our savings more and create better solutions for customers in the future. You'll notice what we don't ask is, what are you growing? We don't care. They're using energy. It doesn't matter. We don't necessarily want that information in our books of what they're growing. And this is really open to any type of residential grower. So. This is our savings calculations on what we assumed for lighting and cooling savings in the residential space. And then these are the assumptions of what we did for baseline versus new wattages. So everything on the right is products that are on our QPL and actual wattages. And on the left, you can see what we kind of assumed they were replacing in those scenarios. This is something that we'll look back at once we get more data from customers using the rebate program to see, are we correct? Are they actually replacing a 600-watt light with a 345? And then I'm super excited to announce that we just came up with a guide for greenhouse customers, along with an initiative for rebates around greenhouses. Right now, they're all custom. Basically, what we'll be doing is we'll be working with each greenhouse customer to model their space, to understand the interactive effects of lighting and HVAC and pumps and watering and everything that's in that space. We have rebates for thermal curtains, coverings like double polyethylene, heating systems, both the system itself and if you're using a efficient distribution system like radiant flooring, LED grow lights, greenhouse controls, ventilation, motors, and VFDs. And we will probably end up making some of these prescriptive. That was my original goal with this, but it's really hard to make these things prescriptive. We started to go into these greenhouse customers, and they all had different square footages, different heating systems, different plans. They were growing different things. So it was really impossible at this stage to create a prescriptive rebate program, but it's absolutely something that we're interested in doing for this group. I could see thermal curtains, VFDs is more or less already prescriptive, and then LED grow lights as future prescriptive offerings. Other things that we'll be doing is looking into cryogenic freezers that happen in processing and whether we can do one-for-one replacements with those, as well as drying recommendations. We have a lot of people who are drying hemp themselves on their farms, and they use a lot of propane and oil and electricity to do that. This is just a case study that I'm gonna go past, but thank you.